Hey guys, another One Take review, and today I wanted to talk about the legendary Jimi Hendrix live album, Band of Gypsies. Band of Gypsies is one of those unique live records that manages to get lumped into an artist essential listening category, even though it's not actually a studio effort. And even though the Jimi Hendrix experience had broken up by this point, Hendrix himself managed to round up friends Billy Cox and Buddy Miles to make for a show at the Fillmore East in New York that was not only impressive as a performance, but also impressive as a live album as well. The actual performances on Band of Gypsies are about as great as you would expect. Hendrix himself proves, as many people have agreed on over the years, that he's one of the absolute greats of guitar, if not the greatest of guitar. That's without a doubt here. He sounds fantastic, as always. He never sounded not fantastic, even on the worst sound quality bootlegs. He always sounded great. But with that being said, I do think that bassist Billy Cox and drummer Buddy Miles are wildly underrated performers here. I mean, obviously, if your name is attached to anything that's being marketed as Jimi Hendrix or the Jimi Hendrix Experience or anything similar to that, Jimi Hendrix's Band of Gypsies, anything of that vein, you're going to be overshadowed. It's Jimi Hendrix. You could just put the word Hendrix on something, and literally everybody else, the cover artist, the sessions musicians, the producers, the songwriters, if there's other songwriters, literally anything will be overshadowed by Hendrix's presence. So it's to be expected that he's really the only one that gets a ton of recognition for this record. But even still, I do think that both Miles and Cox do some outstanding work here with their respective rhythm instruments. Band of Gypsies is an interesting record, not only in terms of influence, but also in terms of my personal enjoyment as well. I will admit that when it comes to the experience, my favorite of their moments were always their more psychedelic and more just kind of in your face sort of moments. I mean, I love some of the more mellow tracks that they did, especially on Axis Bowl is Love, but there's a reason that Are You Experienced is my favorite Hendrix album. It's just nothing but trippy psychedelia one after another with a very like acid rock, hard rock kind of style backing it that would define that record and arguably the Hendrix experience in general. So I think it's interesting that Band of Gypsies as a live album kind of sees not only Jimi Hendrix but also Buddy Miles and Billy Cox kind of go back to the roots of the blues while still taking the more just kind of longer lasting jam sessions of songs like Machine Gun and really holding on to that early hard rock style that defined the experience's sound, except, well, with two new members. If I were to be any sort of critical about the actual performance aspect of this, it would be that I don't find Miles or Cox to be nearly as entertaining or engaging as vocalists as Jimi Hendrix is, and that's hard to do because while Hendrix may have had pretty much zero range, he was one of the most charismatic human beings to exist. I mean, have you listened to an interview with this man? I could listen to him talk all day. He was just a very interesting guy. He could have read the phone book to me, and I would have been intrigued. But my point is that Cox and Miles aren't nearly as engaging as not performers, but vocalists. Especially the Miles-led number, "We Gotta Live Together," I think is kind of underwhelming in terms of energy, and it really does lack that animation from Hendrix that defines the rest of the album, and it just makes for kind of a lackluster song on an otherwise really fantastic record. Nonetheless, even with the high expectations set by the Noel Redding, Mitch Mitchell, Jimi Hendrix trio of the experience, I think that the Band of Gypsies lineup is equally as fantastic. They just work with maybe slightly lesser material. It should be noted, however, that Band of Gypsies is kind of a it's a very jam-based record. Your enjoyment of this album will be based around how much you like jam bands. I mean, there's no 30-minute long jams here a la live albums by the Grateful Dead or Phish, but at the same time, a lot of Band of Gypsies is an exercise in how long the Band of Gypsies band can keep one song remaining interesting. I think that set exercises are more often than not successful. There are a couple times here where things begin to feel kind of droning or drawn out, but for the most part, I think the band are very successful in the jams and make extended songs like Who Knows very warranted with their extended lengths. And overall, I think that that might just be kind of a personal bias because of the fact that I do have a love for jam bands. However, I do think that anyone that considers themselves not a fan of a jam band kind of style should steer clear of this one, even if they are a pre-established fan of Hendrix with his work in The Experience, or maybe even some of his solo records like The Cry of Love, the limited solo records that he did. My point is, if you don't like something that can go on for 10, 15 minutes, if you get easily bored by that, which is completely understandable, you probably won't dig this too much. The live setting throughout Band of Gypsies works quite well as well, in my opinion. This was recorded circa 1970 at the, like I said before, New York Fillmore East, and I know that there are a lot of people that say that a live record can ruin the actual kind of crowd engagement that comes with being at the actual performance physically. However, I kind of believe that to be an invalid criticism when it comes to live albums, unless it's something very notable where you feel incredibly distant. And I don't think that even the greatest artists of all time, like Jimi Hendrix, should be expected to deliver a first person experience when it comes to an actual live album that you're listening to in the comfort of your own home. Unless there's some sort of visual aspect being missed of the artist throughout a live album, like, say, there would be from Alice Cooper, for example, which there's none of that sort of thing throughout Band of Gypsies, I don't think that there's really any legitimate criticism to be had as far as there not being a direct personal experience. I think that as long as you feel like the recording quality is good and you feel like you at least are able to understand the concepts and the emotions that were being conveyed at that actual performance, that a live album is successful. And I mean, Buddy Miles, Billy Cox, and Jimi Hendrix were all straightforward musicians. They weren't gimmicks or anything like that, mostly. And overall, I do think exactly what I just said. I mean, ideas are conveyed perfectly, emotions are crystal clear, and the band consistently jam pretty much greatly throughout the entire thing, not ever really missing a beat in terms of quality or in terms of improvisation. So I think this is a very successful album as far as live records go. The recording quality throughout Band of Gypsies is pretty excellent as well. I would especially recommend the 2020 remaster, which gives a very crisp listen to some of the more intense and emotional performances on tracks like Changes. With festivals and large venue performances like Band of Gypsies, I do think that it can be sometimes easy for an instrumental or a certain member of a band to get kind of lost in the ambience that's created by crowd noise. Now, maybe it's just because everyone there was busy getting blown away by three incredible musicians, or the more likely option, which was they were all dropping acid, but overall, I don't think there's anything like that here. I don't think a single note gets lost. There's no sort of interruption of the musicianship here, which I think is fantastic. And again, it just makes for a crystal clear viewing of one of what might be one of the most underrated moments in Hendrix's discography. Overall, Band of Gypsies is physical live album evidence that he was capable of achieving greatness post experience. As great as musicians as Mitch Mitchell or Noel Redding were, and trust me, they were fantastic, Jimi Hendrix was a beast of his own. With the incredible talents of Billy Cox and Buddy Miles by his side, this trio made some fantastic music here, and had Hendrix lived longer, I'm sure they would have made some other, even more excellent stuff. And it's a real shame that he died as young as he did, because this could have amounted to something that was much more than just one really fantastic live record. But with that being said, I'm going to give this album 4 stars out of 5. I think it's a great album. There are a couple other live albums that I do prefer more, and generally speaking, I'm kind of more of a studio album person, which is why I'm not giving this album a higher of a rating. I probably wouldn't directly go out of my way to listen to it too much, but it's still a great album I would highly recommend. So yeah, 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.